For thousands of years, sweetness was one of the rarest pleasures on earth. Long before supermarkets filled their shelves with candy, soft drinks, and chocolate bars, the only sweet flavors most people ever tasted came from ripe fruit or wild honey. Sugar, as we know it today, simply did not exist. Yet one tropical plant would eventually reshape economies, fuel empires, finance global exploration, and change the diets of billions of people. Hidden inside every spoonful of sugar is a story of discovery, ambition, innovation, and unimaginable human cost. Our journey begins nearly 10,000 years ago on the island of New Guinea. In the dense tropical forests, early communities discovered a tall grass with an unusual secret. When they chewed its thick stalk, a burst of sweet juice filled their mouths. This was sugarcane, the sweetest natural plant most people had ever encountered. At first, sugarcane wasn't processed or refined, people simply chewed the stalks to enjoy their natural sweetness and quick energy. But as generations passed, traders carried sugarcane across Southeast Asia, where farmers learned how easily it could be replanted from pieces of its stem. Gradually, the crop spread into India, where one of history's greatest food innovations took place. Around the first millennium BC, Indian craftsmen discovered how to crush sugarcane, collect its juice, and boil it until crystals formed. Unlike sticky syrup, these crystals could be stored, transported, and traded over long distances without spoiling. The Sanskrit word shakara, meaning small gravel, described these tiny crystals. Over centuries, that word evolved into the English word sugar. For the first time in history, sweetness could travel. Indian merchants carried sugar along ancient trade routes into Persia, where engineers developed sophisticated irrigation systems that allowed sugarcane to thrive in dry climates. Large plantations appeared beside fertile rivers, while mills crushed freshly harvested cane before the sweet juice spoiled. Producing sugar was incredibly demanding. Workers harvested cane by hand, fed it through crushing mills, and boiled the juice in enormous copper kettles until impurities floated to the surface. The process required precision, speed, and constant labor. But the reward was extraordinary. Sugar was unlike any other food. It was lightweight, valuable, easy to transport, and highly desired. When the Islamic caliphates expanded across the Middle East during the 7th century, they inherited this remarkable knowledge. Muslim farmers introduced sugar cultivation throughout Egypt, North Africa, Sicily, and southern Spain, combining advanced irrigation with agricultural expertise that dramatically increased production. Even so, sugar remained incredibly rare. Across medieval Europe, most people had never tasted it. Honey remained the primary sweetener, while sugar arrived only in tiny quantities aboard merchant ships crossing the Mediterranean. It was sold by apothecaries alongside spices and medicines because many physicians believed it possessed healing properties. Among Europe's wealthy elite, sugar became a symbol of prestige. Kings presented it as diplomatic gifts. Noble banquets displayed elaborate sculptures carved entirely from sugar castles, animals, flowers, and mythical creatures designed to impress guests before being eaten. Owning sugar was not simply about flavor. It demonstrated wealth, influence, and access to distant trade networks. As Europe's appetite for luxury goods grew, merchants searched for faster ways to reach Asia's riches. Spices, silk, precious stones, and sugar promised enormous profits. Maritime technology improved, new navigation techniques emerged, and ambitious kingdoms looked beyond the horizon. No one could have predicted that this growing desire for sweetness would soon reshape the world. Within a few centuries, sugar would finance overseas empires, transform entire continents into vast plantations, create one of history's largest trading networks, and become the driving force behind an industry that would change millions of lives forever. The story of sugar was no longer just about a plant. It was becoming the story of civilization itself. Everything changed in the 15th century. European kingdoms were searching for new trade routes to Asia, hoping to bypass the expensive overland networks controlled by rival powers. Among the many luxury goods they sought, sugar had become one of the most profitable. The problem was simple. Europe's climate was far too cold to grow sugarcane on a large scale. The Portuguese found the answer first. On Atlantic islands like Madeira and later São Tomé, they established large sugar plantations where the warm climate was perfect for growing cane. These islands became testing grounds for an entirely new agricultural system. Endless fields of sugarcane surrounded massive mills where workers crushed freshly harvested stalks day and night. Sugar production was unlike growing wheat or grapes. Once harvested, sugarcane had to be processed almost immediately before its sweet juice began to ferment. Harvest season became a race against time. Thousands of workers cut cane under the scorching sun, hauled heavy bundles to the mills, and fed them through crushing rollers powered by water wheels or animals. Inside the boiling houses, workers stood beside enormous copper kettles, stirring the thick juice through multiple stages until sparkling crystals finally appeared. The work was exhausting, dangerous, and relentless. Then, in 1492, Christopher Columbus reached the Americas. On his second voyage, he carried sugarcane seedlings to the Caribbean. Few decisions in history would have greater consequences. The Caribbean and parts of South America offered ideal conditions for sugarcane. Rich volcanic soil, abundant rainfall, and tropical temperatures allowed the crop to thrive. Within decades, islands such as Hispaniola, Barbados, Jamaica, and Cuba, along with the Portuguese colony of Brazil, were transformed into vast sugar-producing regions. European investors quickly realized that sugar could generate extraordinary profits. Plantations expanded rapidly, forests were cleared, new ports were built. Merchant ships crossed the Atlantic carrying tools, equipment, and supplies. Every successful harvest produced fortunes that flowed back to European capitals. But these fortunes depended on an enormous labor force. As indigenous populations declined because of disease, warfare, and forced labor, plantation owners increasingly turned to the transatlantic slave trade. Over the next several centuries, millions of Africans were captured, transported across the Atlantic, and forced to work on sugar plantations. The journey itself was horrific. Men, women, and children were packed tightly into slave ships during the Middle Passage, often chained below deck for weeks or months. Disease spread rapidly, food and clean water were scarce, countless people died before reaching the Americas. Those who survived entered one of the harshest working environments in the world. Sugarcane fields demanded constant labor from sunrise until long after sunset. Workers cut razor-sharp stalks with heavy machetes under intense tropical heat. The mills were equally dangerous. Powerful rollers could pull in clothing or limbs in an instant, causing devastating injuries. During harvest season, production rarely stopped because every hour mattered. Yet demand for sugar continued to grow. Across Europe, tea, coffee, and chocolate were becoming increasingly popular. All three tasted better with sugar. What had once been an expensive luxury slowly became a daily habit for millions of people. The result was one of history's first truly global industries. Ships left Europe carrying manufactured goods to Africa. Enslaved Africans were transported to the Americas. Plantation-produced sugar, molasses, and rum then returned to Europe. Historians call this system the triangular trade, a network that generated immense wealth while inflicting unimaginable suffering on millions of lives. Entire cities prospered because of sugar. Ports such as Liverpool, Bristol, Lisbon, and Nantes expanded rapidly as merchants financed plantations, banks funded voyages, insurers protected valuable cargo, and refineries transformed raw brown sugar into the white crystals sold across Europe. By the 18th century, sugar was no longer just a luxury for kings. It had become one of the world's most valuable commodities. Behind every spoonful of sweetness stood an enormous economic machine that connected 4 continents through trade, agriculture, finance, and shipping. But hidden beneath that prosperity was a human tragedy that would leave lasting scars across generations. Sugar had become far more than food. It had become the fuel of an empire built on global commerce and human suffering. By the beginning of the 19th century, sugar was no longer a luxury reserved for kings and nobles. It was becoming part of everyday life. As the Industrial Revolution swept across Europe, millions of people left farms and moved into rapidly growing cities. Factory workers often spent 12 to 16 hours a day operating dangerous machinery under exhausting conditions. Their meals needed to be cheap, filling, and quick to prepare. Bread spread with jam, sweetened tea, and simple baked goods became everyday staples. Sugar provided inexpensive energy, and consumption began to rise faster than ever before. But Europe faced a serious problem. almost all of its sugar still came from overseas plantations. Wars, hurricanes, or naval blockades could interrupt supplies at any moment. Entire economies depended on sugar grown thousands of miles away. Then, during the Napoleonic Wars, Britain blockaded French ports, cutting France off from much of its Caribbean sugar. Faced with severe shortages, Napoleon Bonaparte encouraged scientists to find another source of sugar that could be grown in Europe itself. The answer came from an ordinary-looking root vegetable, the sugar beet. Although scientists had already discovered that sugar beets contained the same natural sucrose found in sugarcane, Napoleon's investment transformed the idea into a major industry. Farmers across France and later Germany, Russia, and other European countries began cultivating vast fields of sugar beets. For the first time, Europe could produce large quantities of sugar without relying entirely on tropical colonies. The global sugar market changed forever. Prices continued to fall, making sugar affordable for nearly everyone. Bakeries multiplied across growing cities. Chocolate factories expanded production. Candy shops became common on busy streets. Sweet desserts, once reserved for royal banquets, became part of ordinary family life. At the same time, another historic change was unfolding. Throughout the 19th century, abolitionist movements gathered strength across Europe and the Americas. Formerly enslaved people, religious leaders, writers, and activists exposed the brutal realities of plantation life. Public opinion slowly shifted. In 1807, Britain abolished the transatlantic slave trade. In 1833, slavery was abolished across most of the British Empire. Other nations followed over the following decades, although the transition was slow and often incomplete. Many plantations replaced enslaved labor with indentured workers recruited from India and Asia, whose working conditions were frequently harsh. The sugar industry survived, but it was transformed. Steam engines powered crushing mills. Railways carried freshly harvested cane to factories before it spoiled. New refining technologies increased production while reducing costs. By the early 20th century, sugar had become one of the world's first truly global industrial food products. Its influence spread into almost every kitchen. Soft drinks, breakfast cereals, biscuits, cakes, ice cream, chocolate bars, canned fruit, and hundreds of processed foods depended on refined sugar. Food manufacturers valued it not only for its sweetness, but also because it preserved food, improved texture, and enhanced flavor. By the middle of the 20th century, sugar had become almost impossible to avoid. For thousands of years, humans had consumed only small amounts of natural sweetness from fruit and honey. Within just a few generations, refined sugar became a daily ingredient for billions of people. Scientists eventually began asking difficult questions. As obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease increased in many countries, researchers investigated whether excessive sugar consumption was contributing to these health problems. Governments introduced nutrition labels, schools reduced sugary drinks, and many countries launched public health campaigns encouraging people to consume less added sugar. Meanwhile, food companies developed artificial and natural sweeteners to satisfy growing demand while reducing calories. Yet despite changing health advice, sugar remains one of the world's most important agricultural commodities. Every year, hundreds of millions of tons are harvested from sugarcane fields and sugar beet farms across dozens of countries. Massive cargo ships transport it across oceans, while refineries process it into the familiar white crystals found in homes around the globe. But sugar's true legacy extends far beyond the kitchen. It helped finance voyages that connected continents. It transformed agriculture, expanded international trade, fueled colonial empires, and accelerated the growth of banks, shipping companies, and global commerce. At the same time, it left behind one of history's darkest human tragedies through the Atlantic slave trade, a legacy that continues to shape societies today. From villagers chewing wild sugarcane in the forests of New Guinea to Indian craftsmen creating the first sugar crystals. From Persian irrigation systems to Caribbean plantations, from royal banquets to supermarket shelves. The story of sugar is, in many ways, the story of civilization itself. Every spoonful carries thousands of years of discovery, innovation, ambition, trade, conflict, and resilience. The next time you stir sugar into your coffee, bake a birthday cake, or enjoy a piece of chocolate, Remember that those tiny white crystals have traveled farther through history than almost any other food on Earth. Because behind every grain of sugar lies the remarkable story of how one simple plant helped shape the modern world.